Roses are
We
red.
wish to be real.
Hope is the thing that feathers the world is
If we
full of
must be
paper
active,
right
it
to
not be
me.
like
Let
us.
America be America again. Let it be the dream it used to be.
A woman with confidence is an
Atlas,
my life revolution.
Shall I compare these to a song state?
I walk into a poem and I want to have someone
We're all
else.
meant for something.
You're all meant for something.
Still I rise.
Do you know what it is like to live somewhere that loves you back?
My captain.
What if love is the
We are the
sharpest
ones
knife?
with There is a
That cuts
voice
you right
inside.
through.
I'm sorry I missed
You can
it.
never have too much
Love
sky.
is the every only
To
God.
err is human,
Rage,
to forgive
rage,
is divine. That is
dying.
too better
Not
to have
about
loved and lost. Violets are blue.
Poetry is written, spoken, or sung language, usually with rhythmic, structural elements and expressive in nature. Meanwhile, what you may be used to reading is called prose. It's written or spoken language in its ordinary form, without specified structure. The style of most fiction and nonfiction is prose. In poetry, we will focus on lines, stanzas, and verses. But a line is going to be a single row of words. A stanza is going to be a chunk of lines or a chunk of text looking like a paragraph, but in poetry. A verse is a stanza or group of stanzas that have the same theme. You will also hear terms like feat, couplet, and quatrain. A foot is rhythmic unit defined by syllables. A couplet is a pair of lines with the same meter and a rhyme. And a quatrain is 4 lines, a meter, and rhyme. For example, let's look at this poem. A line is just a single line in the stanza or in the poem. A stanza would be a chunk of lines separated by these longer breaks. A foot in Yeezys can walk, but Jordans can run. Let's hit the court and have some real fun. You can tell the stressed syllables are in all capital letters, so you know that those are emphasized just in the way we naturally speak them is stressed, unstressed, and it goes every other. The meter is the number of syllables per line. So if we counted each of these syllables here, Yeezys can walk, that's 4, but Jordans can run, that's 5. So the meter is the number of syllables. A quatrain, we actually have 3 quatrains in this poem, but a quatrain is a stanza made up of 4 lines, and it will have a rhyme scheme. So let's take a look here. The end of each line is what gives us our rhyme scheme. So dribble, own way, baskets, all day. Our rhyme scheme, only the second and fourth line rhyme. So we have the rhyme scheme A, B, C, B in our quatrain. A, B, C, B. So you assign a letter for each sound, and when that sound repeats at the end of a line, you give the letter to that line too. So that's why we have B twice and A and C once. And then finally, we're finishing up with a couplet. Violets are blue, my Jordans are red. All of this winning will go to my head. We have the rhyme scheme AA. With every dribble, we'll make our own way, shooting for baskets, I'll dunk 'em all day. Which terms could be used to describe this chunk of poetry? How is meter determined? I have a question. Do you have a clue? Within this section, what rhyme scheme is true? Look at the ending sounds. Brief little stanza here. What is the rhyme scheme? Poetic devices, sound devices. Poetry will use rhyme and meter, as we've already discussed. We'll be looking mostly at end rhyme when we're looking at our poems in this video. But there's also something called internal rhyme, where there's rhyming within a line of poetry. Another sound device is repetition. This could be the repetition of words, words coming back over and over and over again to make a point, or it could be the repetition of sounds, which would be alliteration. Repetition of a consonant sound, like many mumbling mice are making midnight music in the moonlight. All those M's I just said, that would be consonants. Repetition of vowel sounds, like an A, E, I, or U sound, would be called assonance. And here's a couple examples. Nifty Nancy knits is consonants. Eager Edgar eats eggs is called assonance. But both of these are an example of alliteration. Our last sound device is onomatopoeia, words that are the sound that they make, like whiz, boom, bang, meow, figurative language. It's important to remember that a lot of times in poetry, this can be true in prose as well, but most often in poetry, we are looking at language figuratively, which is not literal. Figurative is the opposite of literal. There will be more to come on this when we talk about reading poetry. When you read poetry, you are doing something called enjambment. This is when the continuation of a sentence continues without a pause beyond the end of a line, couplet, or a stanza. So, for example, we're going to read through to the next line. We will briefly pause at any comma, just like we would when we're reading a regular story, and we're going to have a longer pause at a period or any other marks. But we will not pause just because the line ends. So I will read this like so. The sun sets slow and paints the sky, a fiery hue that makes me sigh. The stars come out and twinkle bright, a night of rest, a peaceful sight. The world is quiet, still and deep, a time for dreams, a time to sleep. The moon is full, its gentle light guides us through the dark of night. Why are there indents in this 8-line poem? Now we're going to talk about figurative language again. So remember, figurative language is the opposite of literal. What this means is when we're reading poetry, we can't take what it says literally, and we have to instead read between the lines to figure it out. These are all examples of a type of figurative language device called idiom. Idiom being illustrated with their literal meaning. But we know that when we hear these things or we use them in conversation or even in a poem, we don't actually mean what the picture is showing. Read this poem to yourself, paying attention to the underlined phrases and what they actually mean on the right-hand side. After reading the poem, which is the best summary of this poem? In this poem, let's look for figurative language 2. The most precious gift, I am told, is all the love the heart can hold. I give it to you, you give it to me. There's enough for the world, and the gift is free. Will you take my love, more precious than gold? It's the finest gift that the earth can hold. Now, what I've highlighted here are phrases that show things are extreme. The most precious gift, all the love the heart can hold. There's enough for the world, more precious than gold. It's the finest the heart can hold. Who is
Adjectives are words you use to really describe things. Handy words to carry around. Days are sunny or they're rainy. Boys are dumb or else they're brainy. Adjectives can show you which way.
these lyrics are from a song called Unpack Your Adjectives from the show Schoolhouse Rock. These are all figurative language examples used to represent adjectives. It's not literal. In the shadows where the whispers grow, voices rise like rivers, fierce and slow. Chains of silence shatter, breaking free, weaving dreams of justice bold as the sea. Now I'm going to mark the text by showing you where there is figurative language. As we saw in these three examples, an author's purpose will always be to entertain, to inform, or to persuade. In poetry, entertainment might mean drawing in the audience using humor, using storytelling, using imagery that might be relatable or really eye catching or attention getting, or using lyrics of a song or adding melody or instruments to their poem. Poets may also seek to inform, to educate their audience about specific topics. An example was in Unpack Your Adjectives that was used to inform a young student about what adjectives are in a catchy way that might help them remember. Schoolhouse Rock is actually really great with this. They have tons of videos with songs and poems about math, about social studies, about English, about grammar. But in a broader context, poets might talk about social issues to raise awareness. They might talk about history and what they've lived through to bring awareness. They might share personal experiences that might be relatable or help others process something similar, or just share their own different perspectives that people might not be aware of. Poetry might be used to persuade. Poets will aim to influence the audience or the actions of their readers, whether it's to be an advocate, using persuasive language to encourage action, might be an emotional appeal. If it's a love poem, you want to be very persuasive to get whoever you are in love with to maybe understand their own feelings or appreciate you or respond positively that they love you back. Or it might be a call to action to encourage readers to take specific actions based on the messages or themes in the poem. Poetry is also great for reflection. Even if you don't plan on sharing your poems, getting your thoughts and feelings out on paper might help you process something in your own real life or connect to other things out there that you've read or seen. Poetry connects the world. It might seek to create a sense of shared experience It might foster connection through universal themes such as love, loss, and identity. A lot of the imagery that's communicated through poetry and contrast and juxtaposition can be felt by people with similar experiences, and maybe they didn't know how to put it into words. And then lastly, poetry can challenge. Poetry might aim to challenge people to think differently, to test their understanding, their beliefs, social norms, social conventions, might encourage readers to think critically about the world around them through the experiences of the poet or the speaker. Writing poetry. Here's where we get to work. Read the poem on the screen. I will not read it to you. And then decide, what did the speaker of this poem learn about poetry writing from their about poetry writing from their teacher. Read this poem to yourself and then answer the question, what did the speaker of this poem learn about poetry writing from their teacher? When you are starting to write a poem, you're going to choose a topic unless one has been assigned to you. Then you're going to want to list some adjectives about the topic. Focus on imagery. What does it look like, taste like, smell like, sound like, feel like? If it's not something physical, you can go ahead and add some emotions that connect you to the topic or decide the purpose or tone of your poem. Then you're going to decide which figurative language devices you want to focus on. And lastly, you're going to choose if it's going to rhyme or not, then start writing. Something you can do is make a table like this somewhere that you'll have it handy so that each time you start a poetry writing assignment, you know how to brainstorm a topic, adjectives for your 5 senses, the emotions, the tone, the rhyme or structure. Now, it's important to remember that some poem types have requirements for the number of syllables and a rhyme scheme. This isn't true for every poem, but limericks, haikus, sonnets, things like that will often have requirements to follow. When I write a poem, it must rhyme and have a specific meter no matter what, true or false. How will brainstorming a topic, adjectives, emotions, tone, and figurative language help you start writing your poem? Here's another tip. When writing a poem, the most common and straightforward figurative language devices you can use are imagery, hyperbole, simile, metaphor, and personification. These are great places to start and usually pretty simple to figure out. Select the terms below that have the correct definitions. Now you're going to watch me write a poem in real time. Focus on the topic and starting with imagery and developing it into other types of figurative language. So that is what I'm going to do. Now, I asked AI, ChatGPT, to tell me a topic, and then from there, I decided the 5 senses or emotions, the tone I wanted, the rhyme or structure that I wanted. Immediately, I thought about how some things are good to forget and some things it's sad when we forget them. I thought of words like the feeling that something is familiar, like craving a familiar flavor of food or something you haven't had in a while, and memorable. These aren't really specific five senses words, but they are pretty good adjectives that fit with my topic. And then I thought of the emotions. Is it something that I long or desire for? Is it something I am sad to have forgotten? Is it loss? Is it grief related? Is there joy? And then the tone, I want to try and show mixed feelings. This feels like it might be a good one to talk about contrast. Things that are relatable might be a bittersweet feeling or an idea that, like I said, some things are hard to forget and some things we want to forget. And then I'm not going to restrict myself too much to the two quatrains and one couplet. Specifically, if things kind of feel like they flow better in more lines than that, I might do more lines. And then it might rhyme, it might not. I might try to rhyme from the start, but if it's I might change it. Okay, so in that poem, some of the things that I've highlighted here, I do kind of like for a first draft, and I like how they kind of got back to my brainstorm. So I really like the idea of dreams being lost to time as we forget things. Um, we forget things over time, so I like that. Um, I like how that kind of gets echoed back and things that get loose or run off or nostalgia dancing. Nostalgia dancing is like a great personification. I'm really proud of that one. I like this idea of whispers of a familiar past, whispers being really quiet, really in the back of your mind. Maybe you don't fully understand, which is why you might be craving details, but those details do not grow. You don't get more details than just the familiar whisper. So I do like a lot of this. I did kind of get into the idea that like you forget some things for the best, but then you lose some happy things too when we forget. I did bring that in at the end. And then I closed with, that's what forgetting will get you. I did end up having a rhyme scheme here. I think it's A, B, C, B, D, E, F, E, G, G. But then there's some things I don't like. Evaporated from the land does not really fit. Like, what is evaporating? There's not really any mention of liquid or nature in that sense. So, in a new draft, I might change that. I might rethink it. I might rework some things. So, then my last question for you, as you think about writing your own poetry, why is the last tip for getting started writing poetry to just let go? Think about why I shared my writing in real time. And thank you very much. That should be all.